So we're going to start the basting now. Usually with any type of stitch, with a blanket stitch or something else, something that you're doing on the outside, and then you can fill the inside in later, I baste in the center. I just take my thread and go through and row by row. But this is the stitch that I'm going to do my rug with, and I have to stitch in the center, so I don't want that thread there because I don't want it bothering me. So I'm going to stitch away from the center on this one because of the stitch that I'm using. So I have my thread, have the knot, and it's pretty simple. I'm just going to baste that outside row. I'm not going to double baste it. You can go back over and baste, double your stitch, but I find if you do that, it's really difficult to pull out, and I don't really think it matters that much because I'm going to keep my tape on until I do that last row in stitching. So these will all be stitched and attached. The last row, as I stitch, I will just remove my tape. So really, you only need that one stitch. And you put your stitch basting on the top, and you just go along, and it is so easy compared to those darn pins, especially with these little tiny pennies. And just keep going along, and you can see how the tape keeps it very secure, so I have no problem doing that outside row. And as I mentioned, keep the tape on while you're stitching. You don't remove the tape until you're ready to stitch that row that you have the tape on. So I'm going to continue and baste from here in. Now what I wanted to make sure that you know is baste when you're with your thread, you baste all of the row and then you stop. No matter if you have lots of thread on your needle or not, stop and only have one section basted. Start with a new needle and thread for another, stop, and then do this one. This one you can do, it's just a small one, you can have that one with your thing, but keep your basting stopping and starting in rows, because if you have a problem at any time and you need to remove the basting for some reason while you're stitching, then you can control it. If you just go all over the place, you don't know where your threads are going to stop and start. So I'm going to continue basting as I have until I have the whole rug finished. So I have the outside row basted. I stopped my thread. Now before you baste these, just lightly go over them, make sure fit them together good. And they basically fit inside this row of pennies that is very straight. So the other thing I wanted to mention is make sure that you don't pull your threads, and I'll show you what I mean by that. And these pennies can be moved around, so really you can't. So don't pull your thread like that. Make sure your thread is very loose. It can be a little loose like that if you want it, but just make sure that they are flat when you do it. So I'm going to continue around, and I'm going to do, the penny doesn't want to stay there for some reason. I'm going to do all of the basting and then I will be back. So I have finished basting. Everything's done. Each row has a separate thread, and keep them loose. Make sure that they are loose and they're not pulling. And now I am ready to start stitching, and as I mentioned before, I'm doing this stitch. So I would put my thread in, my needle and thread, start from the center, and then I would do them, see they do move. I would do them around for that row, next row, next row, and then when I come to this row, everything is stitched, and then I would remove the tape and then put the tape, I think I'll show you that last row, how to do it, because it's a bit different. So I will stitch all the way up to the last row. And just as a review, this particular rug, this is all the rows that's in the rug. But if you're doing a large rug, you would do it in sections. You would lay out, say, 3 rows or 2 rows or whatever. You would make sure that the rows are straight, even, with a straight edge. You would tape them, and whatever happens inside that taped row, it's going to be okay. They'll just fit together. If something's wrong that they don't fit, it's not going to ruin your edge. Once you have that stitched, and then you stitch this edge, you finish the rug on this one. But once you have a larger rug, you remove the tape, you would add more pennies, and then as you go out with your rows, if you added another 2 more rows, you would do this tape, and then instead of take the tape off and do those, you would add more rows, tape, and then fit those in. So that would be how you would do a large rug if you were basting a large rug. And also, when you're doing this, if you have a large rug, you don't have to have it all basted before you stitch it. If I were making this into a large rug, I would stitch up to this point, which I will have to anyway because you have to remove the tape to stitch. So I would just stitch that part. Then I would add a few more rows, tape, stitch that part, another, until the rug is finished. So it's very simple and easy to do, and what a difference between having to wrestle with those stick pins and your threads. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch the rug up until the last row, and then once I have that finished, I will come back and finish the last row. But the bindings that I'm going to do and the edgings that I'm going to do on the rug, I'm going to show you how to do 3 of them, and I'm going to put those in a separate video because you may want to have a different shape, or you may want to reference it in the future and you won't remember where it is and you have to go through the whole video and things. So I'm going to put those separate. I'm also going to show you 3 stitches that you can use with this rug, and I'm going to put those separate as well. So I now will stitch, and I'll be back and to finish the last row.